Good morning. Thank you so much, Gal. Thank you for allowing me to be here again with you this morning. Another Friday, 2 in a row for me. So it's really a pleasure of mine to be a part of this. And wow, the last lecture in the series. So I feel like I'm setting a little precedent here, but it seems to be that you'll be continuing with some great opportunities for information at later dates too, which is great to hear. So I'm here today, a little different than my presentation last Friday. We're going to talk today a little bit about a strategy, an approach to use with young children ages 2 to 8 called the Flip It strategy. And so I'm really excited to be here with you. Again, thank you to Haruv and to OU Tulsa for allowing me to be here. I wanted to give you a quick, so as Gal said, I am from the Parent-Child Center of Tulsa, and I just started there last November as the infant and early childhood mental health consultant. Prior to that, I was working in Ohio. And the reason for telling you this is that when I was in Ohio, I had an opportunity to be trained as a trainer for Flip It. And the Devereux Center for Resilient Children brought the Flip It training to Ohio. And I was lucky enough to become a trainer and did that across the state. So I thought it would be helpful to bring this to the Haruv this morning. A quick overview, obviously, but I think it's valuable information, and I hope that you all find it impactful as well. Okay, so in terms of just official objectives, we'll really just do a quick introduction to the Devereux Center for Resilient Children. That is who sponsored my training in conjunction with Ohio. And we'll look at the Flip It approach just generally initially, and then we'll talk about prerequisites to actual implementation of Flip It. So when I was doing the training in Ohio, it's actually a 6-hour training. So there's a lot to it. I'll try to cover as much as I can in this 45 minutes, but we'll look at prerequisites, and then we'll talk just at the end of our 45-minute, 50-minute session here about the steps so that you can hopefully kind of gain some insight into that before you leave this morning. Okay, so let's look at the Devereux Center for Resilient Children. So I thought it was important to give a little bit of a history of this organization. So the Devereux Center for Resilient Children actually came from the Devereux Foundation. A teacher with the last name of Devereux in 1938 started the Devereux Foundation as a nonprofit organization. She felt that it would be really important to serve the needs of children who had disabilities. And so there wasn't, at that time in New York, an organization where she was that was serving those children. The Devereux Early Childhood Initiative started in 1996, and this initiative was really I guess inspired by the referrals that the Devereux Foundation was getting for young children. So each year they had noticed a trend that younger and younger children were being referred for services. So they began the Early Childhood Initiative to try to really put in some prevention strategies that might be helpful for this younger population. So if you've heard of the DECA program, it is an assessment program that really helps with infants. So they have an infant and toddler piece as well as a preschool piece. It really is looking at protective factors and assessing children's protective factors. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. In addition to recognizing, obviously, that the early childhood referrals were increasing, and then starting the Early Childhood Initiative and that DECA program, they realized that these prevention strategies were helpful even for older children, so they started the DESA program. And then in 2009, they combined all of the young child or the children's services to begin the Devereux Center for Resilient Children. And so that's kind of how it started. I think it's important to understand the history with which this began. And so Flip It is a partnership. Rachel Sperry Wagner, actually she's married now. Rachel Wagner is the developer of the Flip It, and you'll get to see her later on this morning. All right, so Devereux Center for Resilient Children has 6 underlying principles that we will look at now. The first one is that the strength and happiness of children is paramount. So they recognize that children have strengths and that we can build resilience in children by acknowledging their strengths and building on those strengths so that they can be successful in school and life. The second underlying principle is the well-being of adults. So we all know, working with children, that it's a relationship with adults that is really key in the success of children. And so we all would probably agree that this is an underlying principle that is important. So adults need to also have the skills in order to support children in the best way that they can. So we have to make sure that we are supporting adults as well and their well-being. The third one is strengths-based approaches. So the Devereux Center really acknowledges that all children have strengths. Again, as I said, historically, the Devereux Foundation had recognized that supports for children with disabilities was not occurring in New York. And so they said all children have strengths. We just need to find them, support them, and make sure that we are building on those strengths. Data-driven decisions. I think this is an important piece. Some of us, I think, are more passionate about being data-driven. But again, just acknowledging that we have to use informed data. So again, that's one of the reasons why the Devereux Center for Resilient Children has the DECA program, which is a way to assess children's protective factors and make some good decisions about ways to reduce those challenging behaviors. Collaboration. So I think everyone who's in the field working with young children acknowledges that there are many different services available to children, and that we all have to take a collaborative approach in order for those services to be received and to be utilized in the best possible way. So collaborative approaches is important. And then the final piece is family partnerships. So again, we acknowledge well-being of adults and the families that surround children are consistent and nurturing. So again, that relationship piece is an underlying principle. And if you guys want more information, you can see there's a link to the website, and when you get the PowerPoint, you can check that out if you are interested. Okay, so the DECA program supports, and Flip It, supports the social emotional health of young children. So when we're thinking of emotional development of children, we're really referring to the expression of the child's feelings about herself or himself and others, and the situation that he or she will face in the world that she is embedded. And so, you know, how does that child express his feelings? How does he understand those feelings? And again, this is situational, right? So our feelings in any given situation may shift or change. Oh, I'm sorry. The second piece is social development. So social development referring to a child's developing capacity to interact with others. So am I interacting in a socially appropriate way? So really helping children to understand social cues and how relationships impact that piece. So this visual, although it's a little older now, comes from USA Today. It's a snapshot that really just acknowledges that it is important for young children to build skills in social and emotional health so that they can be successful in school or life. So this just references a survey that kindergarten teachers took, really asking them, what is it that helps these kindergarten students do well in school? And so when they started the survey, really they thought that the answers they were going to get would be quite different. They thought that, you know, counting, understanding the alphabet, knowing letters and numbers and things like that would be at the top of the list. But what they found was that kindergarten teachers acknowledged, hey, you know, paying attention, being able to focus, not being disruptive, following directions is really what helps children to start their school experience in a positive way. And so we all acknowledge that this is important, that we have to help children build skills in this area in order to thrive. So defining Flip It, it's a 4-step supportive strategy, and it is designed to help caregivers. So whether or not you're in a parenting role or an early learning provider, maybe you're a therapist. So in any capacity that you're working with young children, you have an opportunity to support their ability to identify their feelings. You hope that you can help them to learn how to regulate their emotions, so learn some healthy self-control. And we know that when we do this, when children are able to, again, develop skills and have positive social emotional health, they learn strategies that really reduces challenging behaviors. And so when we support social emotional skill development, we help young children to be successful in social experiences and then therefore in life later on. So the flip it strategy, most of us acknowledge that, we have that one client or that one student or that one child in our home that is really displaying some challenging behaviors, and we might have some behavioral concerns. So we, a lot of people who learn about the flip it strategies are learning about it because they're like, I have this one child that I just, nothing seems to work, that I just really need something that's going to help me to help him or her. And so, Rachel Wagner and the Devereux Center acknowledges that you can use this as a targeted intervention. So you can say, okay, I am going to use it for this identified child. But then there's also a recognition that, if you're an early learning professional and you have several children in your care, or if you're a parent and have more than one child, again, the age range is 2 to 8, you can use this with all children. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as we move through the presentation. So the flip it strategy is considered a best practice strategy. So it's not an evidence-based strategy per se, but it is considered a best practice strategy. So that's an important piece to know. We acknowledge that, by utilizing this to fidelity, we are, engaging with children in a way that is helpful to them. It's strengths-based. So we all want to, in our engagement with young children, we all want to support their individual and unique strengths. And this flip it strategy is really helpful in that way. And as you see the steps, you'll probably acknowledge that, yeah, that is exactly what it's doing. It's common sense, so it's not, there's no specific formula or anything really difficult about the flip it strategy. It's really common sense and it's easy to use and remember, which is why it's really nice for parents, especially, and caregivers who have multiple children, because it's easy to remember. It's easy to share. So people can, with the acronym of FLIP, which we'll look at in a little bit, we acknowledge that it's easy to remember and easy to share. And you can use it anywhere. So it's not a strategy, I know a lot of parents use time out. That's hard to do when you're in public, but the flip it strategy is applicable in a variety of settings. And it's 4 very simple steps. And again, we use the acronym of FLIP to highlight those steps. All right, let's look a little bit at the prerequisites. So I think any strategy that you all can think of that you've tried to utilize, whether as a parent, as a professional, I think that you can reflect on what was my relationship like with that child that I was trying to utilize that strategy. For me, when I was in Ohio, one of the roles that I held there in the past was as an early childhood mental health consultant. And so my job was to go into early learning programs, Head Start programs, ODJFS programs, in-home programs. And so I was in a variety of settings, but one of the reasons that I was in those settings typically was because there was an identified child who had significant challenging behaviors. So, the teachers and I would talk, again, because it's a collaborative approach, about, what the teacher was seeing or hearing, and I would do some observations. So I was not in these classrooms for long periods of time, but often for the particular child that was identified, the teachers in those moments when I was present would look to me, to do something magical, right? To engage in the strategy that I had maybe talked with the teacher about in order to demonstrate how it could be effective. Well, what I found, and what I'm sure you all would recognize, is that I wasn't effective in utilizing many of the strategies that I would talk to the teachers about because I didn't have the relationship with the child that was necessary in order for that strategy to be effective. And so I would have to usually have a conversation with the teacher and encourage her to try out the strategy in my presence so that we could work through it together, because she was really the one who was there with the child and had that significant relationship. And so it was much more effective when she was able to implement it. So Flip It really talks a lot about, and again, like I said, this was a 6-hour training, so these are just snippets of pieces to the prerequisites, but we acknowledge that the relationships where we feel safe, valued, and understood are really the best relationships that we have. So we have all different kinds of relationships, but I think we would acknowledge that the people that we feel safe, valued, and understood are the ones that we tend to listen to more and end up really learning something or acknowledging something about ourselves in a positive way. For a child, Flip It is the process of learning about his or her feelings, coping skills, and those social skills. And so those are moments where children are very vulnerable, and this has to be facilitated by a safe adult. So I'd like you all to think. I'm going to pause for a little bit here, and I'd like you to think a little bit about who is it in your life that makes you feel safe. Who are those people that you would identify? So if you had something really significant in your life occur, I always think about a few years back, I had a car accident, and the person that I called was my mom, because she's my safe person, right? I needed to talk through it with her. So who is it that makes you feel safe? So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to reflect on that. And if you want to share in the chat box who that safe person is for you, that would be okay too. Okay, so sister, husband, oftentimes people have friends, close friends. So I think that what's important to acknowledge is these are probably people that you've known for a little bit of time, right? I would assume, and I should never assume, but I will assume for this moment, since we're here virtually, that you've probably known the people that you would identify as your safe person for a bit of time. And the reason for that is usually that person, starts to know what makes you you and what makes you unique. A lot of times when I do this, we have an opportunity to talk a little bit about, it's a non-judgmental relationship, right? No matter what, I can go to that person and I don't feel judged. Usually these people help you to problem solve things. So, as I said before, when I was in a car accident and I called my mom, she helped me really just to calm down and think of the steps that I needed to take in order to proceed through that really stressful moment. So it takes a relationship that's honest, that's vulnerable, a non-judgmental type relationship where there's trust and a sense of security. And so that's probably why you identified people that you had spent some time with. Usually we don't develop those kinds of relationships instantaneously. I know that there are probably relationships where you could acknowledge, yeah, we connected right away, but that doesn't necessarily mean that person is your safe person in that moment, right away. So building relationships with children is important, and this takes time. So how do we connect with a child in order for us to be the safe person? So whether or not you're a parent or you're a teacher or you're a therapist, there are things that we engage in with children to help them feel safe. So we build relationships with children by playing with them, right? We get down on their level. We usually offer toys that they like to play with. We might do things like read with children, right? So we're connecting with them. We offer an opportunity to sit with them in a quiet moment and do some reading and engage in in that activity. Listening. I know that, my children are getting older. I have teenagers, but I know this is a really important one. They feel connected with me when I actually stop what I'm doing, which is tough sometimes, and listen to what they have to say, because it's important for them to be heard. So it's sometimes not always fun to do, especially when children like to tell long stories, but it is an important piece to building relationship. Providing structure and routines. So it's important for parents and caregivers, or anybody who's engaged with a child, whether you're a home visitor or therapist, there are going to be some structure and routines in your interaction. And that is something that helps us to feel safe and secure. We know what to expect from the interaction. Loving, right? So we acknowledge that loving and nurturing is a really important piece for helping our children to feel safe and acknowledge us really as the safe person in their life. Okay, so the last piece, and we're going to move into a deeper dive with this one, is showing empathy. So I think everybody would acknowledge that empathy in relationships is really important to create that sense of safety and trust. So research tells us that the best way to teach a child empathy is to show empathy to that child. So I've been in lots of interactions with parents and with caregivers over the last 20 years, and I know that sometimes it's difficult for us to show empathy to a child, but this is really that first step to teaching empathy. So what are we talking about when we're thinking about empathy? Well, that ability to see and feel from another person's perspective. And sometimes this is difficult, right? Because we're in our adult heads, and it's really hard to think about what's going on with our young children and their own small heads and small brains in that moment, right? So depending on if your child is 2 or 8, again, we have to try to relate to that child and see from his or her perspective. So I find this video, I'm sure many of you have probably seen it, that Brene Brown talks a little bit about empathy, and it's a funny video to illustrate the point of what do we really mean to connect with someone and really see and feel from their perspective. I love that video, and I'm assuming some of you have seen it in the past, but it's such a really good description about what we're talking about when we are really connecting with someone else. And again, when we're in our adult heads, that can be difficult at times. So once as a consultant, and I use this example whenever I'm doing this training, but there was a time when I was outside on a playground with 3-year-olds in an early learning program. And I can remember the teacher was extremely stressed out. She was out there by herself. There were probably, 13 students, and she was trying to line them up to get ready to go in for lunch, right? And so she's, okay, it's time to line up. And she's singing the lineup song that she had been using with them. And there was this one little girl, and she just was like not having anything to do with this, right? She's crying and she's just distraught. And so, to support the teacher, I went over to this 3-year-old. I didn't know her very well. I'd been in the classroom a few times, but I looked at her and I said, "You're crying. You seem really upset. What's happening? Or, what's going on with you?" And she looked at me and she kind of nodded, and she's sobbing, and she pointed to her head. And I noticed that the way she was dressed for that day, she had a really fancy dress on and some really pretty shoes, and she had a big barrette, a bow in her hair, right, that had been falling out of her hair, was hanging down in her face. And I said, "Oh my gosh, your bow is falling out." I said, "Is this what's making you so sad?" And she nodded yes. And I said, "Can I help you put it back up?" And so I helped her fix her bow. She perked right up, and she got in line, and she was ready for lunch. But again, the teacher was very overwhelmed in that moment. And I think she was, just annoyed by the crying, right? And so sometimes that ability to connect with a child can be difficult for us as adults, but it's very important. So why is it so hard? I think as adults, we're super stressed, right? I mean, especially now when we talk with others about what they're experiencing, the nation as a whole is overwhelmed with emotions. Many of the webinars and some of the things that I see being offered out there for adults is really just about, how emotionally vulnerable we are as a nation. So I think that is a difficult place for us to be in. We oftentimes need support from other people, and we don't always get the kind of support that we need. As in the video on empathy, we saw that somebody is just there for us, and a lot of times people try to solve our problems for us or help us to find solutions, and that's not always what we need from others around us. I think that the other piece is that we oftentimes need time to reflect on our thoughts, our feelings. We need those mindful moments to really manage them. And I don't know that we always have time for that in our professional or our personal experiences. And so, it really takes some intentionality. And I think that that's an important piece. So it makes empathy for children difficult when we don't give ourselves the space to take care of us as adults. What else makes empathy difficult for children? Well, oftentimes as a consultant, I hear, children are just different today. I don't know what's going on with these kids, but they're just not the same as kids years ago. But I think the reality is that children haven't really changed, but childhood has. So there are really, I think, risk factors in every arena of our children's lives that they're experiencing. They're living with risk factors within themselves. So the three areas I think to highlight are within child risk factors. Within their families, there's risk factors, and then in their environments, their communities, and their schools. So let's dive a little deeper into those. So within child risk factor could be, premature birth, potentially being born addicted, low birth weight, any speech, language, cognitive delay that might be present. But again, these are within an individual. A medical need or a medical diagnosis that a child might have, that would be considered a risk factor. And then any mental health diagnosis that you would think about that could be within the child. So maybe ADHD or OCD, something like that. Family risk factors, and there are others, but we won't get into all of them. But family risk factors, I think, just some to highlight: divorce, parental incarceration, domestic violence that's happening within the family, family members that have a mental health diagnosis, substance use or abuse in the family, financial stress, job loss. We know that this is present for some of our families right now, especially a death in the family. Or an addition of someone new to the family, right? So that could be a new sibling or a new parent. Environmental or school risk factors that children may be experiencing could be poverty, unsafe neighborhoods, discrimination, racism, lack of public transportation, lack of resources, lack of jobs, bullying in schools, unsafe schools, or feeling unsupported in their school programs. So I just thought it would be important for a minute to reflect on what risk factors do you see with the children that you're serving? What have you heard parents talking about? Maybe children are sharing risk factors with you. But if you feel comfortable to share some of those and we can highlight them, that would be great. So what risk factors do you see? So again, if you feel comfortable, if there's any other risk factors that I didn't identify. So maybe I've listed most of them that people have been seeing. Okay, we've got parents who are pushed beyond limits with the stress of everyday life. So low-income households. Again, I know there are a lot of parents out there who are struggling with this right now due to job loss, and that's unfortunate. So again, as you continue to reflect on that piece, I think it's important to acknowledge that our children are really at risk. All right, so Flip It is really about building resilience in children, right? So we know that resilience is the ability to bounce back from difficulty, misfortune, or change. So those risk factors that we've just identified. And the strategy really helps children become resilient by teaching them how to cope in those significant times of challenge. Again, this is supported by the Devereux Center for Resilient Children. So what they've found in their research is that there are 3 critical areas to build protective factors. And so the DECA program really supports these protective factors. So the first one is attachment and relationships. We acknowledge that a child's ability to promote and maintain mutual positive connections with other children and significant adults is critical to helping that child succeed. I think that you would acknowledge the people in your life that you know who are successful have an ability to develop attachment and relationship with others. Initiative is really that child's ability to use an independent thought and action to meet his or her needs. So again, when we build skills and build a child's ability to initiate, to set goals and achieve goals, we're helping that child long term. And then of course, self-regulation. So we acknowledge that people who have an ability to respond to different emotions using words and actions that are appropriate for the situation helps them to be successful. So the Flip It strategy really helps to build skills in all 3 of these areas. All right, let's look at the Flip It specifically. So this is Rachel Sperry. She's the author of the Flip It strategy. And let's see, we have, I think we have
Could I have paper, please?
Okay. Rachel's book, Flip It. I keep saying Rachel Sperry because that was her name when she trained me. So it's Rachel Wagner. Again, transforming challenging behavior. I think it's like $15 on Amazon. So if you're interested in it, I have a copy that I always used in my clinical work as well as in training. Obviously, it's to support the training and professional development. So again, I just want to review the Flip It steps that Rachel went over. So feelings is gently talking with children about what you are seeing and hearing as a result of their emotions. So you're not always labeling a feeling in this step. You may discuss with them what you see going on. So an example of the feeling step would be, I see that the 2 of you are really wanting that block and you're both pulling and grabbing at it. And that's the feeling step, right? So you may not really talk about, you're both really angry in this moment, right? You may just describe what you see and hear. The limit step is reminding children of the positive expectation that you have of the behavior. So you really just want to state positively what it is that you'd like to see. So for the example of the block, you might say, I see that you both really want to play with the block. In our home, we share our toys, right? Or in our home, we're very nice to each other with our toys. And then the inquiry step, like Rachel said, is really that opportunity to have the child think for himself. Now, again, this is developed the more that you utilize the strategy. So with a 2-year-old, this is going to take some time. They're not going to have suggestions necessarily about problem solving. And that's why the prompt step is important, because you would follow up with a suggestion that might be helpful. So the inquiry step, you could say to the child, what should we do about this? So an inquiry is a very open-ended question. So what can we do when we both want the block? And then a prompt, again, for those children who really just don't have the idea or really just can't think of a way to solve the problem, you would maybe suggest something. So for this scenario, you might say something like, I know we could take turns, or you could say something, again, it's about your enthusiasm. You could say, hey, how about we go get the box with all the blocks and we can share all of the blocks and then we'll have enough for everybody. So again, it's really you knowing the child, and that's why the relationship is so important, because it will help you with prompting. You'll know what the child is going to really gravitate toward as a solution. So the Devereux Center, as well as Rachel Wagner, really acknowledges that children who are flipped, and as she said, Miami University in Ohio, which is my alma mater, did some research on the Flip It strategy to find that, yes, children who do this well, and parents and teachers and caregivers who utilize this, help children develop those skills that they need for lifetime success. One thing to keep in mind with Flip It is it considers the root cause of the child's behavior. So we do try to address some of that underlying, stress or risk factor that we discussed a bit ago. But, we do know that there are some children who have more severe issues and difficulties, and they might need a more formal assessment process. So we know that some children would need a referral for a mental health assessment that might be more appropriate. Okay, and then this is the Flip It in action. So I want to tell you as a preface, this teacher doesn't do it perfectly. And in the full training, you know, there's opportunity to discuss it, but it's a good opportunity for you to just see what it looks like with a child who is having some challenging behaviors.
Hello, and welcome to a short introduction.
Okay, so again, there's more training opportunity if you go to the Center for ResilientChildren.org, DRC shop Flip It. There are some training, some webinars there that you can access. But again, the full training is 6 hours, so it's pretty lengthy. And again, the reason for that is because you have to practice it in order to really gain competence in the strategy. So all of the information contained in the PowerPoint really was through Rachel Wagner from the Flip It training, as well as the Devereux Center for Resilient Children. So I just wanted to acknowledge that this is their strategy and that there's many training opportunities that you can access on their website. So for more information or to access that, go ahead and look at centerforresilientchildren.org. Okay, I think that we have hit 47. So I just want to say thank you. I hope that this was helpful. I know it's an overview. It's kind of a quick look at the Flip It strategy. The book for Flip It is on Amazon if you're interested in that. And if you have any other specific questions, we'll have some time now. But if you have specific questions you don't want to bring up today, you can always email me at my email link here.
Thank you, Nicole. While our participants are thinking, and we will let them a few seconds to see if they have questions, I think that you can look at the chat. We had some comments while you were talking, so maybe you can just say a few words about those comments, and we will let people, and we will see if people have questions.
So safety is important in private practice, creating a support system. Yeah, I can understand. So being a therapist or a clinician in a private practice is an isolating circumstance. It's really important to create a system where you have others to really provide feedback, reflection, talk over the work. I think even as an you know, I know we become independently licensed, you know, as we move through our careers, and that is an isolating space. Sometimes we don't always gain, you know, the clinical supervision that we need. So yeah, I think it's important that we continue to get that. I like the idea of asking adults to identify a safe person. So it sounds like this Christine Poe works in CASA, and this might be a good opportunity for children and families who are involved in that court system, that they could identify a safe person. I think that's a great suggestion. It is important as we continue to do telehealth that we as providers are being present. Yeah, so it is different when we're not face-to-face with people. The nuance of being personally in someone's space is missing with the telehealth and the Zoom connection. So yeah, I think, again, finding ways to connect with people in a physically social way while still maintaining some distance is really important. Is there any other thoughts, questions? I think one thing that's important to acknowledge too about the Flip It strategy is it's supposed to be done in fairly quick succession. So it happens fast. And again, I think that that's really up to the adult who is utilizing the strategy. As they get more comfortable with the steps, it becomes a little easier. Are there any other thoughts, questions for me? Again, you can email me if you're more comfortable doing that. I'm obviously open to that as a way to talk.
Well, there
the acronym. Sorry, it looks like, sorry, Gal, it looks like there's one more. The acronym for Flip It is FLIP. So the F is feelings, the L is limits, the I is inquiries, and the P is prompting. So again, flip, right? So FLIP, feelings, limits, inquiries, and prompting.
Okay, thank you. So it's look like we are going to say goodbye. Thank you, Nicolle, for today. Thank you. I will send you the PowerPoint presentation after this session. And stay safe, especially Tulsa people during this weekend. Stay safe. So, goodbye.